Most homeowners assume the sun heats their house mainly through the windows. It's not the windows. For a large share of homes, it's the ground around the foundation. A $15 layer of reflective mulch, placed in the right spot, can measurably lower how hard your air conditioner has to work all summer, simply by changing what happens to sunlight before it ever reaches your walls. There's one detail about your own house that decides whether this makes a real difference or almost none at all, and it's not the size of your yard or how much mulch you buy. It's which direction your home actually faces. Most homeowners have never once checked this before doing yard work, and it's the single biggest reason two identical houses on the same street can get completely different results from the exact same bag of mulch. We'll get to that. If this is the kind of fix you're after, cheap, physics-based, and no upsell, subscribe to the Independence Files. We cover one of these for a different part of the house, your recreational vehicle, your boat, or your emergency setup every few days. Here's a number worth sitting with before we go any further. A central air conditioner in an average home can cost anywhere from $200 to $500 over a single cooling season, depending on climate and how efficiently the system runs. A large share of that cost isn't cooling the air inside your home. It's fighting heat that's radiating in from outside, faster than the system was ever designed to comfortably offset. Most of that outside heat gets blamed on the sun hitting your roof or your windows, and that's part of the story. But there's a second heat source that almost never gets mentioned. Dark mulch, bare soil, and dark landscaping material sitting directly against your home's foundation absorb an enormous amount of solar heat during the day, then slowly radiate that stored heat directly into the ground floor walls and foundation for hours after the sun goes down. Your air conditioner isn't just fighting today's sunshine, it's fighting heat your own landscaping stored up and is still releasing well into the evening. So here's the real question worth asking. If the ground immediately around your house is quietly acting like a heat battery aimed at your foundation, how much of your air conditioner's daily workload is actually caused by something sitting a few feet from your wall, rather than anything happening inside the house at all? Picture two people standing outside on a sunny day, one wearing a black shirt, one wearing a white shirt. Both are in identical sunlight, but the person in black absorbs far more of that solar energy as heat, while the person in white reflects most of it away. Your home's foundation perimeter works the same way. Standard dark mulch acts like the black shirt, soaking up solar energy all day. Reflective, light-colored mulch acts like the white shirt, bouncing a large share of that same sunlight away before it ever gets absorbed and re-radiated as heat. This isn't a new discovery. Traditional building practices in hot Mediterranean and Middle Eastern climates have used light-colored, reflective ground coverings and whitewashed surfaces around homes for centuries, long before mechanical air conditioning existed at all. Builders in those regions weren't thinking about kilowatt hours. They were solving a much older, more urgent problem: keeping a home livable in extreme heat with no mechanical cooling available whatsoever. Reflecting solar heat away from a building's exterior was simply how you survived a hot climate, not an optional efficiency upgrade. What's interesting is that this same principle got rediscovered decades later in a completely different field: urban planning. Researchers studying why cities run hotter than surrounding rural areas, a well-documented phenomenon known as the urban heat island effect, found that dark, heat-absorbing surfaces near buildings meaningfully raise the ambient temperature around those structures, while lighter, more reflective surfaces measurably reduce it. That's the exact same physical mechanism operating at neighborhood scale that a strip of reflective mulch uses at the scale of a single foundation. Keep that direction question from the start of this video in the back of your mind. It's going to explain why this same neighborhood scale research doesn't apply evenly to every house on a street, even ones sitting right next to each other. The U.S. Department of Energy's own guidance on reflective and light-colored building materials confirms the underlying mechanism directly. Surfaces with higher solar reflectance, sometimes called albedo, absorb meaningfully less solar heat than darker equivalents, and that reduced heat absorption translates into lower surface and ambient temperatures nearby. That's not a landscaping claim. It's a documented materials science principle, the same one behind reflective roofing and light-colored pavement in hot climates. Homeowners in hot climate communities who have tracked their own results, using simple infrared thermometers to measure foundation and siding temperature before and after switching to reflective mulch, have documented measurably cooler exterior wall surfaces during peak afternoon sun compared to identical homes with standard dark mulch. That's a second, independent confirmation sitting alongside the Department of Energy materials data and the centuries of traditional hot climate building practice behind it. 3 separate threads, all pointing the same direction. Centuries of traditional hot climate construction, documented Department of Energy materials, science on solar reflectance, and real-world temperature measurements from homeowners tracking their own results. That's a converging pattern, not a single isolated claim. It is worth being precise about what that evidence does not establish, though. Nobody has run a large, controlled study measuring this exact effect on total air conditioning electricity bills across a big sample of individual homes, and that specific number depends heavily on climate, home orientation, insulation quality, and how much foundation is actually exposed to direct sun. What is well established is the underlying physical mechanism and consistent directional results. That is solid ground to build an expectation on. It is just not the same as a single guaranteed percentage that applies identically to every house. So if this principle is this well understood, why is not reflective mulch the default recommendation from every landscaper or HVAC technician? It comes down to a fairly simple structural mismatch. Landscaping and HVAC are two completely separate industries that rarely talk to each other. Landscapers sell mulch based on appearance, weed suppression, and moisture retention. Nobody in that industry is measuring or marketing its effect on a neighboring air conditioner's electricity use, because that is simply outside the scope of what they are selling. HVAC technicians, meanwhile, focus entirely on the mechanical system itself, the compressor, the ductwork, the thermostat, not on what is sitting in the flower bed 6 feet away. Add to that a simple economic reality. Reflective, light-colored mulch typically costs about the same as standard dark mulch, sometimes even less, which means there is no expensive upsell product driving anyone to recommend it. Nobody profits from telling you that a lighter colored version of a product you were already going to buy anyway happens to help your cooling bill. There is no premium markup to justify the marketing effort. As for what this actually involves, a bag of light-colored or reflective mulch. Options include light-toned wood mulch, crushed white stone, or specifically marketed reflective mulch products. Covering the sun-exposed perimeter closest to your foundation typically costs around $15 for enough coverage on an average home's most exposed side. The mulch goes down in the same beds where standard dark mulch would normally sit, at a similar depth, replacing the dark material specifically along the walls that get the most direct afternoon sun. The physics at play mirrors the shirt color analogy directly at building scale. The lighter surface reflects a meaningfully larger share of incoming solar radiation instead of absorbing it, which means less heat builds up in the soil and mulch layer touching your foundation, and less of that stored heat radiates into your walls after the sun moves off that side of the house. Your air conditioner isn't fighting a smaller, less concentrated heat source anymore. It simply has less radiant heat pressing against that wall to begin with. Now, the honest limitations. Because this isn't a fix for every home or every situation. Homes with foundation plantings, shrubs, or trees already shading the ground near the walls will see far less benefit. Since there is less direct sun hitting bare mulch to reflect in the first place, this fix depends specifically on having sun-exposed ground close to the foundation, not shaded ground. This also won't meaningfully help a home with poor attic insulation or leaky windows, where the dominant sources of heat gain are completely different from ground-level radiant heat. Reflective mulch addresses one specific heat pathway, radiant heat from the ground into lower walls and foundation, not roof heat gain, window heat gain, or air infiltration, which often matter far more depending on a home's specific construction. Climate matters significantly too. This effect is most meaningful in hot, sunny climates with long, intense cooling seasons. Homes in milder climates with shorter or less intense summers will see a proportionally smaller benefit, simply because there is less total radiant heat being generated at the foundation to begin with. Mulch type and maintenance play a role too. Reflective mulch's benefit depends on it staying relatively clean and light-colored. Mulch covered in dust or algae over a season gradually loses reflectivity, similar to a white shirt that's gotten dirty. Now, back to the detail I mentioned at the start, the one that decides whether this makes a real difference for your specific house. Home orientation matters more than most people expect. A home with its longest, most exposed wall facing south or west will see a meaningfully larger benefit than one where the most sun-exposed side is a narrow gable end or a wall largely shaded by a neighboring structure. The same $15 bag of mulch produces a noticeably different result depending on how much direct afternoon sun that particular section of foundation actually receives, which is exactly why two identical houses on the same street, facing different directions can get completely different results from the same fix. This isn't a substitute for proper attic insulation, window efficiency, or a well-maintained air conditioning system, and it's not being presented as one. It addresses exactly one specific, often overlooked heat pathway, nothing more and nothing less than that. Which loops back to where this started. If the ground around your foundation is quietly acting as a heat source, the same reflective surface principle applies to any dark, sun-exposed surface close to your home, including the area directly around an outdoor air conditioning condenser unit itself, where reduced ambient heat around the unit can help it run slightly more efficiently rather than working against radiant heat baking off nearby dark surfaces. Small, overlooked heat sources like this exist all around the average home, sitting just outside the boundary of what either landscapers or HVAC technicians think to check, simply because it falls between two separate industries that never compare notes. If you've measured something like this around your own home, or you're wondering whether your foundation gets enough direct sun for this to matter, drop it in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'll do my best to help you figure it out.